It's 1:30. We'll get going. Just a bit of housekeeping beforehand. We are going to be recording this session, so if anybody's not comfortable with that, then please do shout up now. By all means, keep your cameras off if you'd rather. Turn them on if you're happy to. That's up to you. And if you got any questions, feel free to either drop them in the chat, or we will do some Q&A towards the end. We don't tend to record the Q&A just so we can have a bit more of a free-flowing conversation if needed on some specifics. And needless to say, anything we can't cover today, if it's quite detailed, we can pick up as maybe a follow-on conversation. We'll crack on then, if that's okay with everybody. Got a nice, fairly good audience today. Also got a few colleagues on from Barker, from our team as well. So welcome to those guys too. So thanks very much for sparing the time today. My name's Tom Deacon. I'm a partner at Barker and work very heavily in the energy and sustainability sector. As a business, we've been supporting with PSDS, or Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme, since it first was created back in those days of COVID. Today's about Phase 4, which has recently been announced, the idea of today is really to give you a bit of an overview, actually, of the fund itself. For those of you who may not be familiar with its purpose, we'll touch on that. And then I'll also go through some advice and information around eligibility for your organisations and the like. Highlight some issues and some changes from the previous round. It is an evolving fund, and it has changed drastically since it was first created back in 2020, 2021. And then really just to help you plan for submission, give you a bit of a rundown of the typical information required and the application process. And we will cover off some kind of next steps, and I'll point you to some useful documents as we go along as well. As I said, feel free to drop questions in the chat. We'll either pause and cover those during the session or at the end. So don't hold on to your questions. Pop them in the chat. Absolutely no problem. Cool. So just a bit of an introduction and a bit of context. So as I already said, this is the fifth actually. No, I'm wrong. Sixth round actually. So the PSDS 1 and then PSDS 2 and then PSDS 3 was actually split into three separate sections for reasons I'm unaware of. We're now on Phase 4. So this actually is the evolution of 5 previous rounds. It was launched late September this year, and at its heart, it's looking to provide additional funding to support heat decarbonisation projects and associated technologies, and I'll unpack that a little bit more as we carry on through the session. And this is really driving at the strategic objective of government to reduce its direct carbon emissions from public sector buildings. Just looking down the list of those who've signed up to today's session, I think the majority are education, multi-academy trusts and the like. If people don't mind, and if you're not from an education client, if you wouldn't mind just giving me a thumbs up or a wave, that would be helpful. A lot of what we're talking about probably will be linked to schools, but I'm conscious there may be non-school clients on the call. No, okay. So I'll take that as being everybody is either from a school or an education background. So education itself, the education estate is about 28% of the overall public sector carbon footprint. So as a cohort, education buildings or schools particularly have a very, very big part to play around public sector decarbonisation. This particular round of funding is open to all areas of the public sector. But in our work, we largely work with schools and academies. And as such, we're really helping reduce that 27%. And the majority of that emission comes from the heating of buildings and provision of hot water. So burning of fossil fuels, whether that's oil or gas, largely to heat buildings. And the whole purpose of this particular funding scheme, which is funded by DESNZ, is to support the reduction of those direct carbon emissions. So just to unpack that a little bit further, for those of you who are not familiar with the difference between direct and indirect carbon emission, direct carbon emission is where the carbon is emitted at source. So school has gas boiler, that gas is burnt on site. That creates a direct carbon emission as a result of heating that particular building. Indirect carbon emission is where typically this is for electricity. So if electricity is generated through burning of fossil fuels and that is then used in a building in a different location, that is still affecting the carbon being emitted into the environment, but it's indirect. So the whole purpose of PSDS is to really try to reduce those direct carbon emissions, which is fundamentally weaning schools off of use of gas and oil to heat their buildings. So, and I'll come on to the reasons why that fund is targeted towards that particular measure in a moment. The portal actually opens today, and it closes on the 25th of November at 2:00. I'll come on to the differences in how the SAILIT scheme is being administered this time, but that is a new feature. It used to be fastest finger first, as we would call it, but first come, first served effectively. So the portal would open, the quicker you could get your application in, the more likely it would be to be considered. That's gone completely, and they're now doing a much more considered review, and hence why the portal is now open for a period of time, with the deadline being the 25th of November of this year. Because we're still awaiting the autumn budget, we have yet to hear what the fund value is to be confirmed. Last round was around £280 million. But since then, we've had a change of government and there's been a lot of scrutiny on public expenditure. So they've yet to announce what that fund value might be. Now, we've got no indication of whether that might go up or down. So we need to kind of watch that space on this. So why is there a focus on decarbonisation of heat? Well, in a school context, schools equate to 27-28% of the carbon footprint of the public sector. And the majority of that carbon is being emitted through the burning of either gas or oil to heat buildings or generate hot water. This is a really old graph, hence why it looks a bit tea stained. But the data holds true. These are all various types of generation source, and as you can see there, ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps. They are, in terms of direct carbon footprint, significantly lower than both gas and oil-fired heating and hot water systems. So this fund is targeting those two big emitters of carbon in the public sector. So just touching on eligibility now. So there's two things. One is around organisational eligibility, and then the other is around project eligibility. And I think we start with, in terms of projects, I'm sure a lot of you are looking at this thinking, is this the fund that can help my organisation? And I think the triage of questions that you've got to be going through in your head are around some of these questions or these eligibility criteria, which are on screen now. So first and foremost, this fund is limited, and therefore to maximise the impact of that, government are only allowing you to bid for life expired boiler plant. And their definition, lifted straight from the guidance, is that it's generally 10 years or older. That doesn't mean to say that if you've got a plant that's younger than 10 years, it can't be considered, but it would have to have good records around why it's not working. Was it installed incorrectly in the first place? Was it, not commissioned properly? Has it, has there been a manufacturing fault, etc.? But generally speaking, unless your heat source, your boiler plant or your hot water generation plant is unless it's older than 10 years, this fund isn't for you yet. You also need to be having your forward plan, your plan for capital over the next few years, that this project needs to be in the planning. And generally speaking, what I would suggest is that if you've got heat source boilers, for example, that are on your capital plan to be replaced based on condition or age within the next 2 years, then now's the time to start looking at it.
Do you want in? Then I can pop that in my.
Could you guys just go on mute? I think somebody not on mute, if that'd be helpful. Thank you very much. Yeah, so generally speaking, planned replacement within the next 2 years. Anything beyond that, I think that there's a chance that you might be going a bit early on that, and also the technology may well, we're expecting to improve quite considerably in that timescale. There's also a time limit on when you've got to get the projects done, actually. So, that you don't want to back yourself into a corner on that point. A bit of an error here, actually. Let me just quickly correct that. So the threshold, let me just escape from this 1 second. This is wrong. It should be 510. My apologies. They have literally just updated the guidance notes on the financial tolerances on this. So without going into too much detail, they set a threshold of the project value and its relativity in terms of how much it saves in carbon terms. It used to be £325 per tonne of carbon, which hence the correction I've just made. They've now increased that to £510 per tonne of carbon. And this is their gauge. This is Salix's gauge on efficiency. So fundamentally, they've set a value on how much the public sector decarbonisation scheme would be willing to grant for every tonne of carbon saved. So if you've got a very expensive project that saves a relatively modest amount of carbon, that means it's got a higher cost per tonne of carbon. If you've got a very good value project that saves an awful lot of carbon, then your cost per tonne of carbon saved will be lower. And effectively, that is them setting a benchmark around what they will fund. And I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail shortly. The key thing to remember, though, is that you can go ahead and put applications in which may well work out to be more than £510 per tonne of carbon saved. But anything over that will need to be subsidised by the organisation that is putting the bid in, whether that be a school or a trust, which is often challenging. Just a kind of few pointers, really, to help you understand and help pre-select projects that might be eligible. First thing is, oil is better than gas. If you've got existing oil-fired heating systems, their carbon footprint and their carbon emissions will be significantly higher than that of a gas equivalent. So if you've got poor condition oil-fired heat source, then they're likely to have a higher amount of carbon saved, and therefore your eligibility around that £510 per tonne of carbon is improved. Underfloor heating also helps reduce project costs. Fundamentally, if you're looking to replace an entire heating system, so that's boilers, pipework and radiators, and replace that with an air source heat pump, new pipework and emitters, then that is a very big undertaking. Very few buildings it is technically viable for you to simply unplug a boiler and plug in a heat pump without doing extensive modification to your distribution pipework and radiators themselves. It might be you need to put more radiators in to provide the heat that's required. Underfloor heating, though, depending on its condition and the relative age of the building, may mean that you don't need to replace your pipework and radiators. Therefore, if you've got buildings already that are running on fossil fuel boilers that are life expired, but that fossil fuel boiler feeds underfloor heating, the chances are your overall project cost will be a lot lower, and therefore your cost per tonne of carbon will be lower as well. So these are all just little things that we've picked up along the way as the guidance comes out, and having delivered our own bids and projects, they're the ones to kind of look out for. I'm not suggesting that if you have a gas boiler plugged into a conventional system that it won't be viable. It's just some of those projects are better. The final bit I just wanted to mention around eligibility on this slide is around the whole building approach. And so this fund isn't designed purely to leave existing buildings as they are, but then unplug old gas or oil-fired heating systems and plug in new low carbon heating. The whole building approach is absolutely key. And you are able to bundle in and add in additional building fabric measures, other energy efficiency measures such as solar panels or LED lighting. All of those things will help reduce the heat required. So increased insulation may mean a more thermally efficient building, which could mean you could reduce the size of the heat pumps that you design and install, which reduces the cost and improves the project's eligibility. But likewise, the high likelihood is from moving away from gas or oil and to then fuel your heating system through electricity is going to do two things. It's going to put more demand on the grid locally, and it's also probably going to mean that your electricity bill will significantly increase. So any energy efficiency measures, for example, solar panels or LED lighting, when installed in tandem with a low carbon heating source, can actually seek to mitigate that expenditure or the predicted increase on your electricity bills, and also mean you're not drawing as much from the grid because you've made savings elsewhere. That is what Salix refer to and we refer to as the whole building approach. It's not just about replacing one technology, but looking at collective technologies that will all work to the same end of reducing energy and reducing carbon. So it's definitely worth thinking about that. And actually, there is a big onus or big favour towards whole building approach bid applications, because that really drives at the heart of what Salix are looking to achieve overall. And that's energy reduction and carbon reduction at the same time. So we've got something in the chat. Let's have a quick look. Will the slides be shared? Yes, absolutely they will. Oh, sorry, Rob, you've already answered that one. Thank you very much. Cool. Right, so eligibility, just to continue on that. So it doesn't matter whether you're in the school sector, it doesn't matter if you're maintained or an academy school. One thing I would say though is if your school is part of a local authority, maintained school, the local authority is likely to maybe put their own application in. There's a limitation on only one bid per organisation. So if you're an academy school, liaise with your trust, because the trust may well be putting an application in across the whole estate, and likewise with the local authority. We would hate for you guys to be in a position where two bids go in for similar things for what is essentially the same organisation. One of those will get rejected, whereas if you join forces and put the bid in together, it could be that you're both successful. In terms of the actual funding, this is not 100% grant. Funding is allocated based on the project costs, but there is an expectation, a requirement for the applicant, whoever's putting the bid in, to include from their own funds the equivalent of a like-for-like replacement. And so in simple terms, if a full air source heat pump project for a particular building is £200,000, but to replace the gas boiler and associated pipework and radiators was £50,000, then that £50,000 would still have to be your organisation's contribution towards this project. In reality, you may actually have to put more than that in order to hit the £510 per cost of tonne of carbon. And at very least, it has to be that your contribution has to be a minimum of 12%. But most of the projects that we're working on, the contribution towards the project is somewhere between 25 and 40 to 50%. So you're still going to have to put a significant, chunk of the money towards the project. This fund is designed to enable technology, which is currently quite expensive, but it won't pay for it wholesale. You'll still have to play, your organisation will still have to play its part. Projects must be delivered by 31st of March 2028, which is a long time away. This is a new or departure from previous bidding rounds. In previous years, they would allow you to bid for funding over 2 years, but reflecting on the fact that some of these projects are quite complicated, often have long lead-ins for materials and approvals for planning and the like, then they're happy to look over that 4-year period. Additionality applies. So additionality is the phrase they put around you can't fund something twice. So if you've already completed some work around low carbon heating, you can't retrospectively try and get the money. And also, if something's already been commissioned and underway and funded by another source, then that can't be applied for either. I've already mentioned the one bid per organisation, but just to mention that can also be multi-site. So a multi-academy trust can put a single bid in for a number of schools or buildings within their trust. That's perfectly allowable. And the final bit around funding and eligibility is that that funding should be available for client contribution. Now, if you've got own reserves, other forms of funding, SCA allocation, school capital allocation, that could be put towards, then that's absolutely fine. You'll need to be able to demonstrate where your contribution is coming from. With SIF schools, it is tricky because of the timing. We're approaching the Condition Improvement Fund deadline, which will be in December, we expect. And so if your contribution is contingent on a SIF project being successful, then you just need to declare that, but both funds would need to be successful at the same time, which just adds a bit of extra complexity if you are eligible for SIF. You would have to have a SIF win and a PSDS win and bring those two pots of funding together to deliver your project, if that was the requirement. Okay. So key changes from the previous round. The first thing I've already mentioned, and that is they've lifted the threshold from £500, from £325 per tonne of carbon up to 510. And so, some of that is welcomed. 325 has been the threshold for quite a while now, and construction costs are not getting any cheaper. In fact, the opposite. So I think some of that is reflective of the fact that the market is rising, air source heat pumps, and this technology is expensive. So that's been relaxed slightly. However, they give with one hand, they take away with another. So this is now being moved away from a first come, first served basis to a targeted allocation. So whilst they've increased the threshold from £325 per tonne of carbon up to 510, they're now using that measure and the lower the measure will be used to prioritise the funding. So grants that are in grant funding applications that are in which are significantly lower than the 510 are more likely to be successful. So they are going to be using that as a measure. So yeah, it's been relaxed in one way, but actually you're going to need to be closer to your 325, if not south of 325, probably to get a look in. We anticipate. Just pausing on that a minute. I've been talking about this kind of cost per tonne of carbon piece. Don't worry about whether your project will make that value or not. That will need some calculation, and that's the first step we would normally do, is to look at projects, look at their cost, use some existing data and information, hopefully on file, and that will be able to give you an indication of where you sat on that cost per tonne of carbon. It's not sort of a common number we would expect everybody to know. It needs working out, and the Salix tools and the application form actually do that for you if you can throw some basic data in there. So the final change, and that is around the definition of public sector organisation. Don't think anybody here is from a university. If they are, give us a wave. This may well apply to you. But because of the new Procurement Act that came into force last year, the definition of public authority has been tweaked, and that could impact the eligibility of certain higher education institutions, depending on the balance between the funding that comes in from their students through fees and commercial revenue that comes in, defines whether they can bid or not. So again, if you fall into that category and want some advice, then by all means, do drop us a note after the session. Okay, so just in terms of information required, the portal is open. We've got some time, but not loads of time to start to support on getting these applications drawn together. And the first thing I would say is as the funders evolved, the requirements have become the requirements have become far more technical and detailed.
Oh, you're going to know. Okay, yes, yeah.
Hi guys, could you just go on mute if possible, please? There's a couple of people with background noise. Thank you. Sorry, I struggled to hear otherwise. Thanks. Yeah, so as the funders evolved, there is quite a lot of additional information that's been provided or is required to be provided, and it is highly technical. So this isn't like a SIF bid. This isn't like other funding applications that you may be looking at. You will need to have done quite an extensive amount of design, not full design as if to go out to tender. If you have, brilliant, that will strengthen your bid. But there's definitely some detailed calculations that need to be done around the system design so that you can crunch the numbers to get you to a successful application. And typically that will require you to have a heat decarbonisation plan or an energy audit, or some form of low carbon heating feasibility where the costs have been already established, the design parameters have been set, and we can start to plug in the numbers around energy saving, cost of installation, and the carbon saving based on your energy data. So lots of information here. Basic data should be to hand. We definitely need accurate energy consumption information because that's the crux of what needs to be going in. We definitely will need boiler manufacturing information, condition surveys, evidence of age, maintenance records, and all that good stuff to prove that its life expired. But in order to actually crunch the numbers and determine and give Salix the comfort that this application is ready to go, you definitely need to have done a reasonable amount of work to get there. If you're sitting on the call now and thinking, crikey, it's only 6 weeks away, I haven't got a cat and hell's chance, that's not unusual. And myself and the team are regularly working and engaging with people now in preparation for future bids for next year, because and there are other things available, for example, low carbon skills fund, which is 100% grant and is offered by Salix as well, that could enable you to do some of this stuff. So if you're worried about timescale, rather than sort of forgetting about it, definitely worth looking at what you can do between now and the next theoretically the next round, assuming there is another one. Then what can you do to prepare? Finally, just in terms of a recap on the application process, so it opens today and closes on the 25th of November. So we've got some time, but not loads of time. In terms of next steps, first of all, you need to register with Salix if you haven't already. And you can do that via their website. There's a link that will go out on the notes. The next thing is really to agree your bid scope and strategy. So that's considering all of those eligibility criteria. Bear in mind, you've got to be able to put some budget towards it. And you're also going to have select your sites very carefully based on the boiler age and condition. That will really determine what you can bid for. In terms of bid strategy as well, obviously you can bid for multiple buildings across your portfolio or estate, but it's a case of looking at that and making sure you don't, in my opinion, you don't want to bid for too much and end up with 1 or 2 sites, maybe meaning the rest of your project doesn't get funded. So definitely some careful thought around that. Technical support, as I say, this is highly technical. You will need to have had mechanical engineering design and cost input. It is impossible to bid without that information. There's a question from Lisa popped in the chat. Do you need all of these things for evidence or some of them? You're going to need pretty much most of that. In the early days of PSDS, you could put some of that information in. But yeah, you're definitely going to have pretty much all of that information to be able to put a a coherent and complete bidding. So the bar is pretty high in terms of data. And then the application completion, and obviously, gone are the days where we had to prepare applications and then support clients in submitting them as quickly as possible. Thankfully, those days are gone. We've now got a window to submit, which is much more or less stressful. But there's still a lot of time involved in producing those applications, seeking governance sign off, no doubt, internally around expenditure. And in my experience of working on these for a number of years now, is you don't just complete it once and then go, yeah, oh, that's all done and it's ready to go in. There's variations on what you can apply for. You'll need to probably look very carefully at things like solar panels on top of air source heat pumps, making sure that you're not going to all of a sudden find yourself with a project where your energy bills go through the roof. You solve one problem but create another. So it's a very sort of collaborative process and quite iterative as well. So you are likely to have to go through several rounds of crunching the numbers with your technical advisors to get to the outcome. So I'll put some links on here. The slides will be going out afterwards. We'll circulate those. You can click on these little links here and they'll take you to the various parts of the Salix Guidance website. And yeah, if you need any support, there's my email address there. I'm Tom Deacon. My colleague Laura, who's also on the call, Laura Hood, she does an awful lot of work in this space and helps our clients prepare. So by all means, if you're, thanks for the thumbs up, Laura. And so, yeah, if anybody is considering an application in this round or thinks, you know what, too soon, but I really would like to look at this for the next round, then by all means, give us a shout. Okay. We're going to go through some questions now.